Syrian government delegation has arrived in Geneva ahead of the start of the latest round of peace talks. The UN envoy Staffan de Mistura will hold separate meetings with the different groups. In a statement released in the last couple of hours, the UN says de Mistura will start by talking with the Syrian government's delegation, headed by the permanent representative of the Syrian Arab Republic to the UN, Bashar Jafari. He will continue meetings with other participants in the talks and with representatives of the civil society subsequently. Well, Simon McGregor Wood is in Geneva and takes a look at the challenges facing the UN as it tries to find a solution to the war.
Getting the Syrian peace talks to start is proving even harder than expected. On Friday, the UN insisted the process would start, but the main opposition group is so far refusing to attend. The Saudi-backed coalition wants the Syrian government to stop its bombing, open access to besieged towns and free detainees before the talking starts. The Syrian government has agreed to come, but so far is refusing any concessions.
The process is hostage to everybody's narrow interests. And one of the reasons that we're kind of stuck in the mud at the moment is simply because everybody sees the conflict through their own prism. They do not recognize, to a large extent, other sides in the conflict having a legitimate narrative.
The peace plan calls for an immediate ceasefire, the establishment of a transitional governing body, which will run Syria for 18 months before free and fair elections. Syria should maintain its territorial sovereignty. No ethnic or religious minority should be excluded, and all foreign troops should be withdrawn. If the talks do ever start, initial expectations are much more modest. The parties will not even sit in the same room to begin with. And questions remain over the future of President Assad. The opposition insists he goes. The Russians and the Iranians disagree, and the US now says he can stay for a while at least. Recent successes by his forces on the ground may make him less willing to compromise.
There's no doubt that the longer these negotiations drag out, the more it benefits him. So why would he want to go into a negotiation right now, agreeing to absolutely everything? It doesn't make sense when he could potentially get more later down the line.
Then there are the competing interests of the regional players like Iran, Saudi Arabia and Turkey. The recent tension between Iran and Saudi Arabia won't help. Daesh and other groups are not invited, and the military campaign against them will continue. For now, this talks process seems to have hit a brick wall, and despite the pressure being put on the opposition, they're insisting they cannot and will not attend these talks until the Syrian government, with their Russian and Iranian allies, make significant battlefield concessions. And for now, that seems unlikely. Simon McGregor Wood, TRT World, Geneva.
Well, Simon joins us now live to discuss what's been happening even further. Simon, are you getting the sense that the UN officials remain optimistic, despite the fact that not everyone is there?
Yeah, they're doing their best to put a brave face on what is so far a pretty chaotic start to this process. Here's what we know so far. We think in about half an hour from now, the official Syrian delegation led by the country's UN ambassador Bashar al-Jafari will arrive here and at 4 o'clock local time in about an hour they will have a preliminary meeting with the UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura. We'll probably get a photo opportunity of that, marking the arrival of the Syrian government, at least in this process. And then later in the day, Mr. de Mistura will have meetings with peripheral figures from the opposition who have been invited to make sure that this is an inclusive and diverse process. But crucially, the main opposition faction based in Riyadh, backed by the Saudis, is still playing hard to get. They're still insisting on what some here are calling preconditions, namely the lifting of sieges of rebel-held areas, the release of political detainees, etc., before they commit. Now, we have, however, heard in the last few minutes from some of those peripheral opposition figures who are already gathered in Geneva that they're hearing from Riyadh that, in fact, an opposition delegation from Riyadh may be on its way, and some of the key figures in it that the Russians and certainly the Syrian government have objected to may not be amongst that party. So we're hearing from those sources that we may be getting some good news from the opposition faction. A sort of watered-down delegation from Riyadh may be on its way, probably won't arrive, if confirmed, until Saturday.
Well, Simon, for now, from Geneva, thank you very much.